Hey guys, Ryan with Athex Fitness back with Vegan Fitness 101, episode 9, and we're talking about advanced programming today. So I got the anabolic coffee espresso drink right here. It's the secret to my power. It's a vegan protein powder with water, ice, and a little bit of espresso poured in, and this is delicious. Yo, this is like the best coffee drink though, I love it. It's like protein and caffeine all in one. Just a beauty. All right, so advanced programming. This is probably going to be a little more of an extensive video here. We're going to get into all the advanced training topics, how you know when to incorporate them, things like that. So let's get started right away. So most people probably don't need to incorporate a lot of these advanced training methods, at least for the first couple of years. So when you're more experienced, that's when you should start considering incorporating some of these things we're going to talk about. For the most part, you can get by with just following the principles of basic progressive overload over time. So watch the basic programming principles, episode 3 or something. That's going to be pretty much everything you need to know to really build a lot of muscle. That's the basics right there. These will maybe help you build a last couple pounds of muscle in the more advanced training stage. It's not magic by any means, but it might help you a little bit to like manage your fatigue and kind of help just build a little bit more extra muscle. So first of all, there's a big issue with more of the structured programming, and that's just general lifestyle. Your average person who lifts still has a life they have to live. You know, they're not getting paid to lift weights. They don't have a perfect lifestyle where they can follow this exact program, where they can get in the gym at these exact times, things like that. It's very difficult. It's just not sustainable for a lot of people. Structured programming revolves around planning your training in advance through microcycles, mesocycles, and macrocycles, which is basically the principles of periodization. So you basically periodize your program into the specific blocks where you focus on advancing certain goals. So microcycles are usually a training week. Mesocycles are usually composed of several microcycles, which is that training week. So a mesocycle is made up of several microcycles, anywhere as low as 3 weeks to as high as 12 weeks or so. The mesocycle has a specific goal in mind. It could be something like hypertrophy or strength-based or improving general physical preparedness, endurance. It could be anything. So the microcycles are designed to achieve that overarching goal of the mesocycle. Several mesocycles make up a macrocycle. Macrocycle is just several mesocycles made up into one little neat package. You can really program macrocycles with as many mesocycles as you'd like to, but I don't know anybody really programming more than a few mesocycles at a time. Usually it goes hypertrophy-based mesocycle, strength-based mesocycle, and then a peaking mesocycle, which basically means you're peaking for a new 1-rep max or something. That's a pretty common theme right there. I know people who are more advanced athletes, like elite levels, like Olympians and such, they probably plan like year-long macrocycles and stuff because they literally train for a living. But that's not the majority of people, and as you can see, that goes back to the problem with structured programming here. So one way to really help this out for having structured programming but still being able to kind of auto-regulate from day to day, from week to week as you feel, is through the use of RPE. And I really like the RPE system. RPE is basically working around a system of auto-regulating your lifts based on how they feel on a certain day. So if you have like squats, for instance, for one day, and you're programming your lifts at RPE 7, for instance, that means that you should fluctuate the weight on the bar based on how that weight feels. So you give yourself a set amount of reps or rep range, and you work up to that given RPE for the day. So let's say for squats, for instance, for a day, you give yourself a rep range of 8 to 15 reps at RPE 8. That means you pick the weight for the day that you feel would be most appropriate to fall in that range of 8 to 15 reps at RPE 8. And then you get as many reps as you can until you get to about RPE 7 or 8 or whatever. That just means that you're going until you feel like you could have only done 3 more reps. The RPE system is on a scale of 5 to 10 really, anything below about 6 being speed work essentially. So the bar doesn't slow down at all from rep 1 to the later reps when you end your set. There's no slowdown, that's basically speed work. Anything above RPE 6, that means basically you had a certain amount of reps left in the tank. So if you classify a set as being an RPE 6 when you end it, it feels like an RPE 6. That means you feel like you had about 4 reps left in the tank before you hit utter failure. RPE 10 would be an absolute grind, meaning you have no more reps left, and everything in between there means you have a certain amount of reps left. So subtract that number, RPE 7 or 8 or whatever, from 10, and that's how many reps you feel like you could have done left. If there's a 0.5 after the number, that means you maybe could have done one more rep. So if you give it an RPE 7.5, for instance, that means that you maybe feel like you could have done 2 more reps if you really had to, but you're not exactly sure. Programming around the RPE system just is basically using an auto-regulated system to adjust the rep, set, or weight range for the day, or maybe all of those variables. You give yourself a certain RPE to work up to with a certain amount of weight, and you basically hit that goal on the given day. If you feel very good, maybe you can push that weight extra. If you're not feeling so good, if you didn't sleep as well or something, then you can kind of pull back a little bit and allow that fatigue to kind of manage itself.
Start? I don't feel so good.
So that's how I compose most of my programs, especially for intermediate and advanced athletes. And I think beginners should definitely start learning this as soon as possible. So as soon as you're done a set, if you're not familiar with RPE system, just start kind of ranking how many reps you feel like you could have done left, and that's your RPE. Just kind of keep tabs on that for a while, and then occasionally do an AMRAP set, or as many reps as possible, and go to failure, or where you feel like you could not have done another rep, which should be pretty obvious to you. It should give you a general idea how far off you were with your RPE rating. Another thing that's really important for advanced lifters is going to be exercise selection rotation. So you'll generally adapt to a lift pretty quickly. If you kind of rotate your exercises, this helps both mentally and physically to give you a new stimulus. So if you've been bench pressing with a wide grip for a long time, it may be beneficial to go to a close grip for a while, not just because it's a slightly different movement pattern, but also just to kind of work different muscles a tiny bit. Your body gets so efficient at doing a certain movement pattern, you're able to press more weight, let's say for a bench press. But if you switch to a close grip, for instance, and you're not familiar with that, you have to kind of reset a lot of that weight right away and build back up to it over time. Your body's not quite as efficient with that movement. So for a variety of reasons, you should incorporate different exercise variations. It doesn't have to be as much as like a conjugate system, for instance, like Westside or something, where they're constantly using different resistance bands or chains on the barbells or something. It could be as little as a few exercises, just rotated in and out here and there every few weeks. You can kind of progress on new exercises over and over again, and that can just be a little more exciting than just working with the same lift over and over again. So there's several ways to overcome plateaus. Generally, if you're plateauing, that's a pretty good sign that you're moving on to being more of an intermediate lifter at that point. Novices should be able to progress generally week to week, and then given a few resets. But then after you stall for a while, after a few resets, you're pretty much encountering that intermediate territory. As soon as you're an intermediate, you're gonna have to start struggling with overcoming plateaus, and there's several ways to do that. You can increase weekly volume. That's a pretty surefire way to try to get a new stimulus. So this could be done through increasing the amount of sets, the amount of reps through the week. Add an extra set every week or so, and that's pretty much a surefire way of increasing volume. If you can't progress on weight anymore, that's a new way to progressively overload through volume. Another method you could use is increasing the amount of frequency. So if you're stuck with a 225-pound bench for a 1 rep max, hitting that movement twice per week, then you could try incorporating a third day per week. Not only is that extra volume, that's just a new weekly stimulus in there that may help your body kind of adapt to that even more. But just from trial and error, some higher frequency programs, for instance, like squat every day, that works really well for some people. So that may be a method that's worth checking out for you. Another good way to help overcome plateaus is through targeting weak points. So if you know, for instance, your triceps are the weak point in your bench press, like for your lockout on a 1 rep max, that's where you fail, then you could start trying to hammer triceps through things like JM presses or something, tricep push downs, things like that. And if you build that muscle up, that's going to mean more strength over time. More strength over time, moving more weight, means more hypertrophy. So that's a pretty surefire way also, just increased volume on weak muscle points. Also, you could target specific ranges of that motion. If your failing point on the bench press, like I said, is the lockout, you could try doing more work in that lockout range. So something like a 2-board press where you're limiting the range of motion more to that lockout point, that could be something that's worth experimenting with, things like that. So deloads are another thing that can be really helpful. I myself didn't deload at all for years, and I became so fatigued, and I didn't realize I was so fatigued. I was in college at the time, and I was falling asleep in all my classes, and I had no idea why. I took a deload week once I found out about it, and then all of a sudden, I was completely alert in my classes. I never fell asleep again. And it was all because I was so fatigued from just lifting so much for so long, and I was just so tired and I didn't realize it. This very well could apply to you too. So deloads are a great way to manage fatigue, and there's several ways to do it. If you have a structured program, like we talked about above, you can program in a deload week every 8 weeks or so, every 12 weeks, or just auto-regulate it for when you feel really fatigued. Just put that deload week in. For a deload, you should still be hitting those movements or at least similar movement patterns, but with vastly reduced weight, like about 50% of your 1 rep max, maybe even a little bit lower, just to go through those movement patterns. I don't really recommend just not doing anything for a week or not lifting at all for a week. And that's because you just become a little too detrained with those movement patterns and such, and you have to relearn a little bit, so it just sets you back a tiny bit. If you're still hitting those really light weights, you're still familiar with those movement patterns, it might feel like there's no weight on the bar or anything, but surprisingly that will help a little bit just to maintain strength and muscle for when you get back to the original program again. So there's a certain point when and why to consider hiring a coach. If you're very serious about lifting and you're at an advanced level and you want to compete at a very high level with powerlifting or bodybuilding or whatever, it's definitely a good idea to at least try hiring a coach who's very experienced. Do your research though. There's a lot of stinky coaches out there, to be completely honest.
Hey, wait a minute. What about the old stinkeroo?
And know who you're hiring. Make sure they're a good fit for you. Ask other people who have worked with them before. Another reason to hire a coach is if you just need general motivation and just more advice, things like that, from someone who knows more than you. There's no harm in hiring someone to work with. Just like I said, make sure they know what they're doing and go into it with an open mind. Be ready to learn. Be ready to put in the work. If you're more interested in learning about more advanced training topics also, I highly recommend checking out Renaissance Periodization, reactive training systems for more of a powerlifting approach. And I also like the website powerliftingtowin.com. I don't think he's active at all anymore, but I learned a ton from his stuff. He's got a lot of great content on that website still. Renaissance Periodization is more of like a bodybuilding style site for the most part. Mike Israel's got a lot of great information from Renaissance Periodization, so it might be worth looking into that. But those are a few recommendations for further reading. If you don't feel like writing your own program out, I totally understand that. It takes a lot of time and a decent amount of knowledge to have a program that works really well, but it does help experimenting with what works for you and learning what works for you. So I do recommend trying to get into that over time. But if you don't want to do it or you don't have the time and you don't want to hire a coach, then it might be worth checking out some pre-made, like cookie cutter-esque programs. Some that I recommend are going to be the Candido 6-week program. It's more of like an intermediate program. I got great results from that. It's kind of more of like a powerlifting focused program, which I think is great for anyone focusing on physique or strength, because building more strength will mean more muscle. It's only when you get to a more advanced stage where you have to specialize a little more, in my opinion. But that's a great program. I also like 5-3-1 to an extent, but I recommend programming in 2 times per week lift frequency. I also like Greg Knuckles' Average to Savage program, which I'm doing right now actually. It's a very customizable program. He only charges $5 for it. It's highly worth it. And there's a bunch of other great strength training programs out there that are free though. Programs like Shako, which is a very popular one. You can run something like Squat Every Day, the Bulgarian squat program, or something like Smolov, which is pretty... Smolov is pretty infamous for, it increases your squat, but it's very high volume and very difficult. I feel like everyone should do it once though, just to experience what it's like and just experience really hard work. So those are a few that I recommend. And that's pretty much everything you need to know for advanced programming. Obviously, this is just like a little brief introduction into the vast rabbit hole that is training programming, and it can get very complex at a certain level. And there is a lot of science to back this stuff up, but that's pretty much all you're gonna need to know for like 99% of people out there. So I hope that gave you a good idea, and if you liked the video, please like and comment below if you have any questions, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me out a ton. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you guys in the next episode, episode 10. 2 more to go. See you later, guys.